fracture. Now, those attacks have left millions of Ukrainians without power in sub-zero temperatures. The opening statements are already underway. Let's see if we can listen in.
And thanks to Cambodia for being here, Beyond Europe, and international organizations covering a wide range of fields testifies to the strength of the international community solidarity in support of Ukraine. For almost 10 months, Ukraine has been resisting with courage and determination the Russian aggression started on the 24th of February. And dare I say this time openly, because let us remember that this aggression had already started in 2014. Without assuming it at that time completely, but in fact, it's been 9 years that Ukrainians have been undergoing war, overt and covert. I want to pay tribute to the Ukrainian armed forces that repelled the Russian offensive against Kyiv and that have managed to take back, thanks to their courage and abnegation, so much territory. And I want to pay tribute to the Ukrainian people as a whole who, despite the horror of the crimes committed by the Russian occupiers, as in cities such as Mariupol, Bucha, Irpin, Izium, and so many others, bears the scars and will bear the scars for a long time to come of this cruelty. The Ukrainian people, as I was saying, continues to fight with admirable determination for their country and freedom. The recapture of Kherson in the middle of November demonstrates the futility of the sham referendums that Russia had organized in an attempt to annex 4 regions of Ukraine, and that the international community condemned by an overwhelming majority at the United Nations General Assembly. Since Ukraine regained the upper hand on the ground, Russia, whose military weaknesses, the military part have been exposed, has opted for a cynical strategy of destroying civilian infrastructure in order to bring Ukraine to its knees. With each of your country's victories on the ground, Russia cowardly responds to new bombings of the electricity, gas and water infrastructure necessary for the population's survival during winter, with a clear objective, in response to military defeats, to spread terror among civilians, attempting to break up the rear because they cannot hold the front. These strikes, which openly target civilian populations and infrastructures, these strikes, Russia openly admits that are only aimed at undermining the resistance of the Ukrainian people, constitute war crimes. They undoubtedly violate the most fundamental principles of humanitarian law. These acts are intolerable and must not go unpunished. I want to be clear here in this context that it is for Ukraine, victim of this aggression, to decide the conditions for a just and lasting peace. And in this respect, dear Volodymyr, the 10-point peace plan that you have outlined is an excellent basis on which we must build together. But in the immediate future, the emergency is to support the resilience of the Ukrainian people. It is to allow Ukraine to get through this longest winter that we wish to organize together this conference called In Solidarity with Ukrainian People, and whose results we wish to be very concrete. First of all, above all, the idea is to mobilize our partners, friends of Ukraine, countries committed in humanitarian support and international donors in order to provide concrete assistance to preserve the functioning of critical infrastructures that I mentioned and allow the people to live through the winter: energy, water, food, health, transportation, clothing. And I hope that our collective commitments will be commensurate with the challenge and will help you in meeting the most urgent needs of this winter. We will bring exceptional aid. As for France, we have already disbursed 151.5 million euros since the beginning of the year, and we will be adding 48.5 million euros these days for the priorities identified within the framework of the conference: 27 million for winter emergency and the rest distributed in aid in different sectors: displaced persons, sexual violence, children, food aid, mental health. And over and above this, we'll be adding an additional contribution, exceptional contribution of 56.5 million euros in the field of electricity and energy for the acquisition of LEDs in the part of the initiative coordinated by the European Commission that the President of the Commission will be talking about. 63 new high-power electrical generators and several transformers, in addition to the 100 generators already delivered in November, but also additional financing for water, food aid, health, which will take the total effort of over and above what has already been done to 125 million euros of emergency aid. This support is essential. I'd like to thank all the countries for their contributions announced in the framework of this conference. Secondly, dear Volodymyr, we have realized that the coordination of emergency aid needed to be perfected and improved in order to respond in a very operational way to the needs of Ukraine, and we were evoking this yesterday with the Prime Minister of Norway and the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. We need things to arrive concretely in the field, and this is something that we've learned from past conflicts. And other than the announcement of amounts, we need close cooperation with points of contact in all the countries in order for the aid to arrive in real time on the ground, in the field. And with close dialogue with Ukraine and the European Commission, whom I thank very much for this, over the last few weeks, we can announce today that we are setting up a reinforced mechanism for coordinating international aid that you qualified, Volodymyr, on Sunday of Paris mechanism. Will be taking support of the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism, which is already playing a valuable role today, and will be extended to volunteer states wishing to take part in the support effort. Several non-European states present here today amongst us have designated points of contact with a view to joining this mechanism. I particularly welcome these countries, which demonstrate that you don't need to be a Western country to be convinced of the need to support Ukraine over the long term. This mechanism, focused on emergency aid, is in addition to the coordination of energy aid initiated by the United States within the framework of the G7 and mechanism for reconstruction that we have clarified under the German chairmanship of the G7. This conference today, these initiatives, here to accompany a series of major international events that have marked the recent months. I'm thinking of the Lugano conference that you hosted, Mr. President of the Confederation, dear Ignacio, and which enabled Ukraine to present its reconstruction plan and which laid down the fundamental principles of the reconstruction of Ukraine. I'm thinking of the Berlin conference, co-organized at the end of October by Germany and the European Commission, dear Ursula and dear Annalena, which gave rise to fruitful discussions between experts on the coordination of the long-term reconstruction of Ukraine. And we will meet next year in London to continue this long-term commitment alongside Ukraine. Because we will also be at Ukraine's side when it will finally complete its fight for freedom. France intends to, as of now, play its full part in the reconstruction of Ukraine. And this afternoon, I will be opening with you, Mr. Prime Minister, an economic forum in the presence of 500 French companies, which will allow us to mobilize these companies for emergency aid, but also to encourage more longer-term investments in Ukraine. Finally, over and beyond our states and companies, allow me to salute and welcome the mobilization of the entire French society in the service of Ukraine. On the 8th of December, we brought together around the Minister Colonna non-state actors, our local authorities in particular. Over and beyond welcoming Ukrainian refugees, 1,800 local authorities have contributed up to 9.5 million euros as an aid fund for Ukraine, and we have encouraged them to make further contributions in favor of emergency winter aid. The highest representatives of the National Assembly, the Senate, and local authorities, the French NGOs, are with us today in this room, and I would like to thank them for that. It is the French team which is mobilized, and I know that several countries present in the room are functioning in the same way, and over and beyond today's commitments are bringing support every day in a very concrete way, and I'd like to thank them for it. So this is what I wanted to say in the opening of this conference, dear Volodymyr. I want to say here that you have in Paris heads of states and governments alongside your spouse and your prime minister and several of your ministers. They're fully mobilized and they have the will to fight and to act in solidarity with Ukraine. And up until the last day, last minute, to hang up in there for this support because you are carrying out the fight for your freedom, your sovereignty, but it is also a fight for the international order and for our stability of all of us. Dear Volodymyr, it is an honor now for me to give you the floor, and thank you very much for being with us once again.
Дуже дякую. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emmanuel. Mr. President, Madam von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Minister Fiala, and leaders of different institutions, Minister Schmier, Zelenska, with the ministers present. I'm very happy that we have managed together for this first conference with the desire to overcome the energy terror campaign. I remember when Emmanuel Macron called me suggesting we organize this event. We already had a few strikes, and there was already a campaign of terror waged with Iranian drones trying to trigger a humanitarian catastrophe in our country. Russia needed to terrorize Ukraine and all of the democratic world. In response to that, what we did is that we did everything to prevent and counter a potential blackout and campaign of energy terror. We have had many hits, airstrikes on our energy structures, and all of the power stations, hydroelectric power stations, thermal stations, and others have been hit. Imagine what this would do in your country. One of the Russian strikes made power plants come to a grinding halt. So everything worked on only a very speedy restoration of the power station destroyed by Russian strikes would require 1.5 billion euro to rebuild. So after every single strike, we try and get the technical capabilities and power plants up and running every single day. Our energy specialists need to reconnect many Ukrainians and reorganize the supply because of the lack of energy on the grid. Now, for the time being, roughly 12 million people in all the regions of around Kiev are disconnected from power supply. Unfortunately, this is a very typical situation, and every single day we expect new Russian airstrikes, which can increase the number of disconnections and power outages. That's why interventions are as necessary in Ukraine as armored vehicles and bulletproof vests. It's the only way of protecting the ordinary people. And the general public system, given the existing conditions, with the Russians trying to generate a total blackout. A parallel power generation system is being built now in Ukraine. It is being built as fast as possible in all of the different regions, but there are thousands of SMEs in Ukraine that are carrying on functioning with power generators. Hospitals, for example, work with power generators. Thanks to these power generators, we managed to save thousands of jobs. Internet connection, telecommunications all over the country, and over 5,000 access spaces have been opened. These are locations where people can come and warm up, recharge their appliances, and connect to the internet. And I'm very thankful to all of the countries partnering with Ukraine to manage the level of energy in our countries. The key element is to maintain the main power grid in Ukraine and to guarantee its operation, its stable operation, in spite of all of the Russian attempts to make Ukraine the darkest place of Europe. That is why this format, this event, is important. That's why here and now we need to agree on specific actions which will allow Ukraine to survive and to envisage the future, and to make sure that all of the democratic forces can assist Ukraine as far as possible to fight anti-democratic forces, namely Russia. to prevent many disasters and protect our citizens. We need different types of equipment, power generators, transformers, protection for high voltage grids, gas turbines, motor propellers with gas pistons. The representatives of our country at the conference can give you the details and all of the technical specifications of the equipment we need. In addition, our energy power system needs until the end of the winter and the heating season, emergency support to the existing system. And we need this from Europe. We need to be able to import power from the European countries into Ukraine. To make this possible, we need to find a solution and a network with network managers which allow the energy to be important. All of the technical specifications, once again, will be detailed by our energy specialists. This will cost roughly 800 million euro. It, of course, is a very high amount, but the price or the cost of it is lesser than the cost of a potential blackout. So I hope that these decisions will be made accordingly in the framework of the conference. The missions of the European Energy Agency that will be sent out to all of the nuclear power plants in Europe. I mean, we're asking missions to be sent to wherever is needed in Ukraine because upon this depends the stability of our region. And the missions sent out by the European Union will be a factor guaranteeing security and the control of an additional supply of energy. Because of the destruction of our power plants by terrorist attacks, we'll be required to use more gas to heat ourselves this winter than expected. We'll need to buy 2 billion cubic meters of gas this winter, and this will be an element to ensure our stability, and that's why we need your leadership. The fifth point is another practical result of the conference could be an agreement on the funding of a project that Emmanuel mentioned already. And this would be a project to buy LED lamps for Ukraine. This might not seem very important, but 50 million of those LED lamps will allow us to save roughly 1 gigawatt of power. I mean, the average deficit of our power grid is 2.5 gigawatt for the time being. We will also need special mechanism for coordinating efforts. The Paris mechanism will allow us to provide swift answers to all of the challenges that have been caused by the terror campaign led by Russia. So far, we do not have an anti-air defense system as modern as required to counter the Russian missiles, but we will manage to create a decision-making system which will deprive Russia of the impact of this terrorist tactic. When the stability of Ukraine will have been maintained throughout the winter, this will prevent waves of migration of the population towards your countries. No airstrike or no attack against power station will allow Russia to carry out its objectives, and Russia will have to think about how to put an end to the aggression, how to stop. And I think this is in our hands now, and I thank you once again. I thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this event. And I really hope that concrete decisions will be made. Thank you very much, and long live Ukraine.
Thank you very much, dear Volodymyr. Thank you very much for these words and the clarity of the messages conveyed and the needs. I will now give the floor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. Dear Denis, you have the floor.
Доброго дня, високоповажний пане президенте Еммануель Макрон,
Good morning, dear Mr. President Macron, dear Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, dear Mr. President of Ukraine, dear Prime Ministers, Vice Prime Ministers, heads of parliaments, presidents of parliament, excellencies, ministers, dear colleagues, representatives of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, can we start the video that will accompany my talk, if possible?
Отже, більше 9 місяців пройшло з початку повномасштабного вторгнення російських військ на територію
More
України.
than 9 months have passed since the beginning of the invasion, the large scale of the Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine. These are the most difficult months of the history of modern history of Ukraine. In the last 9 months, our peoples have gone through so many tears and suffering in so many cities, and the whole world has seen that the Russian army is an army of torturers, rapists, and terrorists. But these last months have not broken us, have not broken the Ukrainian people. We have defended Kiev, and the enemy has not managed to take our capital, neither in 3 days nor in 3 months, and will never take it. More than half of the territories that Russia seized after 24th of February have been taken back by us. We've freed the Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, and almost all of Kharkiv territories have been liberated. And here you see on the screen the number of missiles that have been bombarded on one district of Kharkiv. We've freed the regional center that Russia was able to capture. That is in Kherson, but the army is advancing, and we will continue till the complete victory. And the aid and support in our effort, we'd like to thank all the partners that assist us and support us every day. The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, Vice President of the European Commission, the American President, Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister of Canada, neighbors, our constant and faithful partners, the representative of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Prime Minister of Czechia, who is part of our assembly here today, the Prime Minister of Slovakia. I would like to thank all the governing entities and partners who help us and provide us financial support for our defense. You have seen the suffering of the Ukrainian people. You have seen the destruction that has been brought upon us by Russia, but you've also seen the courageous Ukrainians who are fighting and will continue to fight for freedom. Thanks to the help of our partners, we have succeeded in inflicting a defeat upon the Russian army on the battlefield, and Kremlin understands that it is incapable of taking Ukraine as it did on the 24th of February. Since the fall, the Russian troops have intensified their attacks against the energy system. The politicians and propagandists openly say that their objective is to leave the Ukrainians without light and heating. They think they will break us and force us to submit ourselves and capitulate. Russia has never understood and will never understand a free Ukraine and free Ukrainians. Russia wants to torture us and terrorize us. They believe that they can break us in this way, but Ukrainians are holding courageously and continue to work and help their state, their soldiers and armed forces. The life of millions of Ukrainians is henceforth a fight and a daily courage.
24 листопада був завданий черговий удар проти нашої енергосистеми. Люди залишились без світла і
On
води.
the 24th November, there was a new attack on our energy system, but this energy terror did not make the Ukrainians panic. At the eve of the attacks, this little girl was very ill, and then her house lost electricity, heating and water because of the attack, and her parents took her to the closest place where there was light, gas station, so that she could get medical help. And you see the fear in her eyes. Here in front of you is Igor. He heads an online course for students because the light has been cut in his home, but he went to the police station to continue with providing the course for his students. You have these 3 surgeons of Lviv doing a very complicated operation at the time when Russia bombed our energy system, and the hospital found itself without any electricity supply. And on this day, several doctors not only operated in this way, but they also brought into the world several babies, and that is what free Ukrainians are. They are not broken by the Russian terror. Our people are courageous. And the emotions of our people have been better described by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. He turned towards Russia. He said, without gas or without you, without electricity or without you, so without water or without you. Cold, hunger, thirst, obscurity are not as scary for us as your so-called friendship and fraternity. But history would put things back in its place. We will have light, gas, water, food, and this without you. For 2 months of systematic attacks with missiles and drones, Russia has succeeded in damaging nearly 50% of our energy system grid. There is no grid left unattacked. 45 different energy grids have been affected without voltage. High voltage lines extending over thousands of kilometers have been damaged, and hundreds of Russian missiles have tried to destroy our energy system and deprive us of light. Nonetheless, our system has preserved its unity, and our technicians are working round the clock in order to make all the repairs necessary, which require normally months. They do it within weeks or if not a few days. Thanks to their professionalism, Ukrainians have light at least from 1 to several hours a day. We understand that Russia will pursue these terrorist attacks. They will not give up its intentions to destroy our energy system. They want to plunge us into obscurity, into darkness. But to protect ourselves, we must protect ourselves against the air missiles. And in the course of the last months, we have received systems that help us to have anti-air protection. But we want a greater supply of air defense equipment. They will protect the civilians. And supplying modern systems of air defense is true humanism. Thanks to these air defenses, we will be able to close the sky and prevent Russia from causing greater deaths in Ukraine and greater suffering in Ukraine. The second thing that we need today is assistance for the restoration and rapid repair of critical infrastructure and energy equipment that has been damaged. We are looking for energy equipment all over the world, and we ask the international community to help Ukraine. And we ask for aid for the millions of Ukrainians who continue to fight and remain in Ukraine. At the time when Kremlin has decided to attack and destroy Ukraine, they have committed a fatal error. They did a bad calculation in everything, in fact. They calculated the power of the Ukrainian army, the courage of the Ukrainian people, the stability of the Ukrainian state, and the will of the political leaders to fight against the aggressor with its people. I am convinced that they want to put us into darkness, and that will fail thanks to our partners and friends from all over the world. We will survive this winter. The intention of Russia to plunge us into darkness is a challenge for civilized world, and we don't doubt that the world and Europe will not allow this plan, bloody plan, to come to light. We will do everything so that each family gets heat and light. We are preparing ourselves for different scenarios, the sustainable absence of light or heat. Upon the initiative of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, we have launched centers of resilience, and these are invincibility centers where the Ukrainian people can come, get some heat, charge their batteries, and there are nearly 5,000 centers of invincibility, of resilience, where there's light and heat and electricity provided to the Ukrainian people. But we need many, many more. We need nearly 30 million to ensure this aid to the peoples, and we expect from our international partners that they contribute to provide these islets of resilience. We would like to thank our allies for their military, financial, humanitarian aid from the US and Europe has allowed our government to assist many millions of Ukrainians that are suffering from the war. The humanitarian aid coming from all over the world assists our people a great deal. These are sent in conditions which are extremely difficult. The aid for energy equipment allows us to restore the system more quickly. In Ukraine, the names of leaders of all the countries that are helping us to survive and win will figure on the pages of our history textbooks. We will never forget the...
You've been watching DW's live coverage of the opening of an international donor conference to support Ukraine taking place in Paris. We heard President Emmanuel Macron with welcoming remarks, joined by Volodymyr Zelensky by video link. And also the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal was there sharing his thoughts and some moving images from the war. So we know at this meeting there are dozens of representatives, not just from countries, also from international organizations and French businesses, and Macron promising that France will help Ukraine not only get through winter, but also beyond that, saying France will play a full part in the reconstruction of Ukraine. So obviously we will be covering this conference for you here on DW as more comes in. Now, though, we're going to turn to some other news, actually right here in Berlin, where shocking revelations about a far-right plot to overthrow the German government have been at the center of discussions in Parliament this week. So following a special session on Monday, further details have now emerged about a group linked to the so-called Reichsbürger movement that allegedly planned to carry out a coup.
Germany is still in shock after last week's nationwide raids targeting far-right suspects. It now appears their network may have been wider than first thought. Members of the German Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee revealed that investigators found more than 100 letters of so-called declaration.
I would like to thank President Macron for organizing this event. And all of the people here are fully aware of what is going on in Ukraine. The Prime Minister has just detailed the situation and shown us images from Ukraine, and I think this is something we still hear in the news, and I think it would generate a condemnation from anybody with a clear mind. I mean, this war and the Russian intervention have generated a number of figures of destruction that are impossible to fathom. I mean, all of this is much more than anybody could have expected. How could we feel when one imagines that more than 4,000 missiles have been fired on Ukrainian cities? Or what about the 50,000 missiles which have been launched by the occupiers in one single day over our country? What about 1,700 schools which have been destroyed or hit by airstrikes. How would one feel with over 1,100 hospitals that have been hit or destroyed by artillery fire? How can you imagine half of France being cut off power for many hours in a row? So even if all of this is impossible to imagine when we haven't lived through it, one can say with a certain amount of certainty that Ukraine is holding out no matter what. We've all managed to become stronger and greater than we were before the war. In order to protect ourselves, we've managed to grow stronger. I will only give you one example. The example of a man who didn't even imagine what he was capable of doing to save other people. And this is an example among many. His name is Yuri Kuznetsov, who works in the hospital of Izium in the region of Kharkiv in Ukraine. He's part of the traumatology department. On the night of March the 6th, he started working, as he usually does, in the hospital, and he stayed there until September. He worked until Izium was freed from the Russian occupation. When they came into the city, the Russian military fired constantly at the intensive care units, the emergency services. All of these were destroyed by their strikes, like many other locations in the city. But the hospital carried on operating. In the basement, in very inhuman conditions, Yuri and other members of the medical staff carried on working. During those 6 months, Yuri became a surgeon. And allow me to remind you that he was in the traumatology department. He even gave birth to children. Now, 9 babies were delivered during that period also. Everybody became greater than they were in the past. Yuri was brought to perform surgery on those who had been wounded by landmines. The equipment in the hospital was looted. Beds in the COVID department were stolen. They even took electric wire and basins. In the laboratories, thank God, they did not take what was the most precious element of the hospital, which was this doctor. This is only one example of one single person of a regular general physician who became somebody who saved many Ukrainians. So Ukraine has managed to hold out thanks to individuals like this doctor, individuals who became greater than they thought they were. And this is the source of Ukrainian resilience and invincibility. These are those who are fighting in our defense forces, our doctors, energy specialists, who restore the power grid after it has been hit, and all of those who oppose to the obscurity generated by the terrorist campaign of Russians in our country. So in this large-scale war waged against the country, Ukraine has become greater than it thought it was in the past. And I think France has the same feeling. Thanks to the resistance of the Ukrainian people, and thanks to the support of France, you can take this gratefulness for all of you and to feel how each one of us has become greater than we thought we were. So we're thinking about how we can do more to protect freedom in Ukraine and restore the peace. And I'm part of all of those people. Insofar as possible, I call all of you to action. And insofar as possible, I would like to give back to Ukraine what war has stolen from it. And I can only encourage you to join your efforts to those existing now. I know that amongst you all of here, there are representatives of SMEs and mayors and part of the leaders, world leaders for the defense of Ukraine, and we'll always be grateful for that. Time has come for all of us to grow, and I talked about the hospital in Izium, and the idea today is to provide assistance to help us restore the hospital in Izium. It is was a regional hospital that took in over 150,000 people. So we have to reconstruct this hospital, and that's why I have created my foundation, bearing my name, Olena Zelenska Foundation, which, alongside other projects, is assisting Ukraine to be restored. We want to allow life to overcome destruction, and we want to work in the occupied territories which have suffered much destruction. We want to allow the country to operate normally again and provide warmth and hope to our people. I have a very specific objective here. I'm here for the hospital, the municipal hospital in Izium, and I can only invite you to provide assistance to the hospital. It's the objective of and the motto of my foundation, become greater than you were before. So please join us in this victory and this huge task of restoration. I thank you for your attention, and I thank President Macron for giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you, and I can only hope that peace will be restored as fast as possible in the country and the Ukrainians will be freed from Russian occupation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ma'am. I'd like to thank the 46 countries, 24 international organizations that have made this mobilization possible. Several ministers are around this table, director generals of these organizations, ambassadors, and I'd like to particularly thank the heads of states and governments who've taken the trouble of coming and made themselves available to be here. And I'd like to, as a priority, give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of Switzerland, and then Luxembourg, as follows. And thank you very much for being made yourself available, Madam Chair. Dear Ursula.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, dear Emmanuel, dear Prime Minister Denis, dearest Olena, the First Lady of Ukraine, fellow leaders, ministers, excellencies, I think in short, friends of Ukraine. We've seen in a very impressive speech by President Zelensky and you, Olena, but also the film and your words, Denis, that the greatest act of defiance today for millions of Ukrainians is just to go on with their lives. We have seen how Russia is deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, seeking to paralyze Ukraine at the beginning of the winter. And I think Russia's tactics are very clear. I mean, my friends in Ukraine, they tried to break your defense, and Russia failed badly. And now they're trying to break your spirit, but Russia will fail because Ukrainian spirit remains unyielded and unbroken. Ukrainians are trying to carry on with their normal lives, and I think the film was very impressive to see how the images of hospitals and schools keeping on going despite the blackouts, mothers that were heating food and water on small fires, even shops trying with innovative solutions to keep on going. I think every single person in Ukraine is sending the same message to Russia. Ukrainians are not afraid. Ukrainians are free. Ukrainians are fighting for sovereignty, and we stand by your side, and that's why we're here today. Putin's targeted war against Ukraine's economy and the most basic services needs a firm response. And I think we have done a lot of good work already in the last weeks and months. For example, take the solidarity lanes that bring Ukrainian goods and agri-food out of Ukraine into the European Union and into third countries. And it brings into Ukraine vital revenues. The solidarity lanes now have exported 20 million tons of Ukrainian grain and food products, and it has brought back to Ukraine 15 billion euros of vital, much-needed revenues for the country. So the solidarity lanes have really become a lifeline for Ukraine's economy, and we will keep on strengthening them. But as we all know, Ukraine, and we've heard it, also needs direct financial support. During this year, the European Union, the member states and its financial institutions have provided more than 19 billion euros. Now we're looking at the next year, and I have very good news, because yesterday evening it was possible to agree on 18 billion euros for Ukraine, 1.5 billion every month, so a steady flow of direct budget support. And I want to thank you, Prime Minister Fiala, for the leadership in the negotiations as presidency. So this excellent cooperation really yielded a big success yesterday evening. Now, besides financial support, of course, there is the support in kind we're talking about today. I want to reflect on two ways to do so. The first is what each of us can do individually and what we can do together. On my first point, let me report that the European Union is working to increase the amount of electricity we can trade between Ukraine and Moldova and the rest of Europe. This is vital because we need to keep the Ukrainian grid functioning despite the Russian bombs. So meanwhile, we have provided 40 large generators to ensure uninterrupted power supply to 30 hospitals in the regions of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia, Mykolaiv, and Kherson. These are exactly the hospitals that need these generators, because then they are independent and keep on going with the power supply. This comes on top of around 800 generators we are sending all across the country right now. And we all know that this kind of assistance can literally save lives. And I know that all of you are going the extra mile in the coming weeks and months to provide this material. We have listened very carefully to the speech of President Zelensky, where he calls on the international community to support the purchase of 50 million LED light bulbs to Ukrainian households. These LED light bulbs are so vital because they are 88% more efficient than the old-fashioned light bulbs. So an enormous saving of energy. 50 million LED light bulbs, if deployed, they would save the energy that would amount to 1 gigawatt of electricity, which is equivalent to the annual output of one nuclear power plant. So it's an enormous amount of energy that can be saved by that. And these savings are crucial to reduce the pressure that we have on the Ukrainian power grid right now. Therefore, the Commission is ready to mobilize 30 million euros. This contribution will cover roughly 30 million LED light bulbs. And I hope that others will join, because in these times, literally, of suffering and dark, it is so important to bring light to Ukraine. What can we do together? Coordinate, optimize, and speed up our support. Yesterday at the G7, we decided to give the go to the reconstruction platform together with Ukraine and with our international partners, the relevant international organization and the international financial institutions. The construction platform will start operating already next month. The European Commission, together with Ukraine, will provide the secretariat. The platform is about immediate relief. So it starts immediately with immediate relief and then will go on with sustainable reconstruction. And it will match investment and reforms on the pathway of Ukraine's EU membership. I want to thank all those who, in the run-up to this conference, have helped so much. It starts with the conference in Lugano that we had, Di Ignazio, and in Berlin, the conference of experts, dear Annalena. This all helped to now shape the reconstruction platform, and that next month it's up and running. We would be very happy if you send kind of liaison officers, personnel, to the Secretariat, because it's a common task we have to deliver, and we need your expertise and the close cooperation with all of you. Final point, donations are crucial. Mr. President, dear Emmanuel, you mentioned it, but we have to get them quickly to where they are needed in a coordinated manner. Right now, we're working with our G7 partners to integrate their energy assistance into our coordination and logistical chain for the energy. And reflecting to the Paris mechanism, I want to announce that at the heart of the Paris mechanism, we are now creating a new hub in Poland, which will become operational already this week. It is quite simply a network of warehouses from which goods can be transferred quickly into Ukraine. So this hub will guarantee a rapid, reliable, and cost-effective delivery. And we are ready to finance both the storage and the transport then from Poland to Ukraine. Be it humanitarian aid or reconstruction, it's cooperation that magnifies our support to Ukraine. I think we do learn the lessons of these 10 months of atrocious Russian war. Putin's war of aggression failed mainly because of two reasons. The first one is the bravery and the courage of the Ukrainian people. Unbelievable, impressive. The second one is the international community's remarkable unity. So let us stay strong on this unity, let us stand up for Ukraine, and let us literally bring light to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, dear Ursula President. I'd like to now give the floor to the President of the Swiss Confederation, Mr. Ignacio Cassis. Thank you very much, President, dear Emmanuel. President Zelensky, if he's still listening to us, Mr. Prime Minister Denis, President of the European Commission, dear Ursula, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here with you in Paris, in a safe place which is lighted and warm, lit and warm. This is not the case at 2,400 kilometers from here. It just days away.
Well-lit and warm environment. With the return of war on our doorstep, we face the harsh reality that the ideal of a peaceful and democratic world was an illusion, even in Europe, where we thought that war could never happen again following the fall of the Berlin Wall. The fact is that we were wrong, and that is why we are here today.
I'd like to thank France for its Paris conference.
In particular, very much, Mr. President, for convening this conference, which will help us on two levels. It will allow us to continue the recovery work initiated in Lugano and Berlin, and bring us together in supporting Ukraine as it faces its current emergency, the winter cold. I would also like to thank you, Mr. President Zelensky, and you, Mr. Prime Minister Michal, for the exemplary resolve you have shown in the face of great adversity. And of course, you also, Madame Zelenska. Ladies and gentlemen, I traveled to Kiev at the end of October and saw the damage inflicted by missiles and drones. I also saw firsthand the magnitude of humanitarian need among the brave people living in the city. And the situation has deteriorated since then. As President Zelensky has told us, Ukraine is in a desperate situation, with Russia attacking its energy civil infrastructure in the midst of winter. This has created a terrible humanitarian crisis for the Ukrainian people. I wish to reiterate here that Russia's attacks on civilians and infrastructure constitute severe violations of international humanitarian law. Switzerland strongly condemns these attacks. Once again, I call on Russia to comply with its international obligation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I learned three things from my trip to Kiev. Firstly, Ukraine requires immediate emergency assistance to get through the winter. Based on a proposal of my government, the Swiss Parliament approved a 100 million Swiss francs emergency humanitarian aid package last week. This package is targeted towards helping Ukraine tackle the challenges it faces this winter. The credit will be disbursed immediately. And from next year, Switzerland will invest in the rehabilitation of power plants as well as healthcare and sanitation facilities. Switzerland will also focus its efforts on promoting the rule of law, strengthening democratic institutions and seeking redress for the violations committed against the people of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, the second thing I learned from my trip to Kiev was that clarity is still needed. In Berlin, we realized that we still needed to clarify various aspects of the recovery process. I am pleased to note that discussions have progressed since then based on the principle adopted in Lugano. Allow me therefore to welcome the declaration of the G7 leaders adopted yesterday announcing the establishment of a donor coordination platform, which I finally understand now with your words. Thank you so much, Madam President. We must step up efforts to fine-tune the organizational and governance aspects. We could do this also on the margins of the World Economic Forum in Davos or at the next meeting of the European Political Community in Chisinau. You can be confident that the recovery of Ukraine is of utmost importance to Switzerland. J'arrive enfin à ma troisième certitude.
I come to the third certainty, the trust. Trust is not something that you can buy. You have to win it over in the field thanks to our shared projects and by the implementation of concrete and ambitious reforms.
To securing political and public support for the recovery process in Ukraine. Let me make it clear, it is essential that we adopt a structured approach to recovery that builds on lessons learned from the past and is backed up by sound data. As stated last July in Lugano Declaration, the Ukrainian people should take the lead and communicate their needs in the 5 priority areas identified at the conference: water, energy, food security, healthcare, and transport. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here because all our futures are at stake. Our future depends on our ability to 1, restore peace in Europe, 2, defend freedom and the right of peoples to live in a just international order, and 3, ensure that Ukraine and its people overcome this crisis and return to normal life. At today's conference, I therefore expect us to master all necessary means and resources to help Ukrainians get through the crisis and beyond that, to bring them hope. Cet espoir dépend de nous ici.
This hope depends on us here and now.
That hope depends on what we do right here and now. Thank you so much. Slova Ukraina.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. Thank you, President. Thank you, Emmanuel, President Zelensky. Mrs. Zelensky.
To meet you both here. And to Prime Minister Chimal Denis, good to see you, and colleagues and friends. Let me first thank the government of France for hosting today's conference. I think the message is twofold. First of all, we have to reiterate Russia's war has to stop. I think that is a core and key message. And in their hour of need, we mobilize to help our Ukrainian friends, and we maximize the effectiveness of our joint understanding. And what is that understanding? Well, the preservation of an independent and democratic Ukraine within internationally recognized borders, where people can live in peace, security, and prosperity. And a Europe and a world where international law applies, including the core principle of the United Nations on which this was founded, the sovereign equality of all its members. That's why Ukraine's struggle is so much a common struggle. To you, Prime Minister, dear Denis, my friend, let me say in the clearest terms, Norway will stand with you as you continue your legitimate fight for survival in the face of illegal and brutal aggression and unacceptable, unlawful, and barbaric targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We worry about the safety and welfare of your people, your brave people, and we commit to helping you through the winter as we have done our best to do over the last year. Last Friday, my foreign minister signed an agreement which will provide 100 million euros to the World Bank's infrastructure program in Ukraine. That is a fund which will be immediately available for reparations. It will contribute to repairing critical infrastructure such as the power grid, roads and hospitals. For 2022 and 2023, Norway has budgeted 1.4 billion euros in support of Ukraine. 1.1 billion has been provided, covering humanitarian, financial and military support. And we'll be trying to respond to Ukraine's need, especially in the military area. I'm pleased to announce here that we are preparing for further support for Ukraine in early 2023. My government has initiated a process with all the political parties across the board in the Norwegian Parliament with the aim to agree a substantial multi-year program for Ukraine, not only 2023, but for years to come. There is a strong sympathy with your cause in Norway, and it's my aim to build on that. Let me elaborate briefly on some of the priorities that will be guiding our work, cher Emmanuel. First, we will emphasize flexibility in our approach to make sure that we can address urgent needs as the situation on the ground continues to evolve. I think that's key, because we cannot exactly determine the need a month or two from now as the war goes on. For the immediate future, this means assistance to repair critical infrastructure, care for refugees and other displaced by the war, and funding to sustain basic public services and continued military assistance. Let me also add to that, Prime Minister, that we are receiving Ukrainians in Norway, and they will be warmly received and taken well care of. Second, we will underline the importance of international coordination, as has been stressed by the President and the President of the Commission. Building on lessons from other conflict and post-conflict situations, we will emphasize the needs defined by the government of Ukraine. They should be leading in identifying needs and owning the solutions. And to this end, Norway welcomes the G7 announcement yesterday to establish a coordination platform for short and long-term support. And third, we will invest with a long-term perspective, not only to signal our commitment, but as a means to widening our engagement. It's our aim to help you through the war, but equally to build back better. By achieving EU candidate status, you have embarked on an ambitious reform agenda, and we will support you as good as we can on that path. And fourth and finally, we will work through organizations and mechanisms with a proven track record, including the international financial institutions, the UN, and international humanitarian organizations. Friends, let me end on a personal note. This weekend, we celebrated in Oslo the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And I had the honor of meeting the representatives of the Belarusian human rights advocate Ales Bialatsky, imprisoned in Minsk, the Russian human rights organization Memorial, which is now being chased around in Russia, and the very brave representatives of the Ukrainian human rights organization Center for Civil Liberties. They all three shared the Peace Prize. And meeting them was a stark reminder of the darkness that has descended on parts of our continent, on the repression that has taken hold of Russia and Belarus, and the violence that has been brought down on Ukraine. It's really authoritarianism against democracy and freedom. But that meeting was also an illustration of hope and exceptional courage, and hope that better days will come, and courage to fight on despite tremendous personal risks. So, cher Emmanuel, as we continue our deliberations here today and in the months ahead, let the example of these human rights defenders guide us and inspire us in our efforts, in pursuit of a Europe where everyone can live in safety and freedom. Thank you, and Slava Ukraine.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, now I'd like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Cambodia. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for being here today.
Madam Emmanuel Macron,
Dear Emmanuel, President of the French Republic, Prime Minister of the Republic of Ukraine, and Madam the First Lady of Ukraine, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me and a great joy to have been invited to take part in the conference standing with the Ukrainian people that is taking place in Paris with so many high-level leaders and personalities. Taking part in this conference reminds me of some years ago the circumstances when the parties to the conflict in Cambodia managed to sign an agreement in Paris on October the 23rd, 1991. After the first round of negotiations between myself and Prince Norodom Sihanouk in 1987. These peace agreements, the Paris peace agreements, were the starting point towards the end of the civil war in Cambodia at the end of '98, and this in the framework of the win-win strategy set up in Cambodia. This is a country that has been destroyed by 2 decades of chronic war, and it has become a free and peaceful country with an average rate of economic growth of over 7% per annum consistently for the past 20 years, this until the COVID-19 pandemic. It integrated not only in the region but also in the world, becoming an active member of the ASEAN community, taking part in regional affairs and international affairs. During its presidency of ASEAN, Cambodia deployed great efforts to try and find a solution to the conflict in Myanmar, while at the same time knowing that the crisis is a complex one and will be a difficult one to find a solution to. In addition, Cambodia received peacekeeping forces, the UN peacekeeping forces, between 91 and 93. It has become a country which, since 2006, has sent out roughly 8,000 blue helmets to 9 countries in Africa, countries of the Middle East and countries of Europe. As a country which has suffered from tragedies and havoc resulting from war, Cambodia has a very high idea of the importance of peace and internal stability, and is doing its utmost to help other countries of the world that have been hit by war. With this in mind, in the framework of the three-party cooperation in Ukraine, Cambodia has decided to send out technical officers to provide training for demining forces in Ukraine. At the same time, Cambodia will provide technical training and will share its know-how directly with 15 of our demining officers and members of the unit in charge of managing emergency staff in Ukraine. And this will be in January of 2023. Now, in spite of the fact that Cambodia is a small country with limited resources, it will think of other ways of providing assistance to Ukraine to ensure the livelihood of its people. Ladies and gentlemen, as a result of its experience, Cambodia understands fully that we cannot wage war to put an end to war. Now, with this in mind, I fully support the position of the French government, generally speaking, and would like to express my sincere appreciation to the active efforts put in by the President of the French Republic, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, who was always given a priority to peace talks, favoring safety and security, and initiating dialogues to find a solution to the security of all the parties in conflict. Cambodia opposes the aggression and the use of force and the infringement of national territory. And Cambodia considers political dialogue as the only way out of the crisis. It would be a mistake to imagine that waging war could put an end to the war. I would like to underline the fact that a ceasefire is absolutely necessary for the population. This is something that we need to seek through political dialogue at high level or at local level to pave the way for the evacuation of those who wish to leave and to find a solution to the humanitarian crisis and to allow people to celebrate the traditional celebrations of the end of the year. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the participation of Cambodia to this conference is to underlining the principles of humanitarian principles of the rule of law and the respect for sovereignty and the respect for the territorial integrity of an independent state. At the same time, Cambodia wishes to express its solidarity to the Ukrainian people in these difficult times of a devastating war. And lastly, I would like to wish the Ukrainian people to find peace, security, and stability in the turning around of their country. And I wish much success to our conference and a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'd like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Mr. Xavier Bettel. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for allowing us or giving us the opportunity to see Yolena again, for those of us who know her. And I can't imagine the stress you're going through on a daily basis, Yolena, knowing that your husband, of course, has had a price put to his life by Russian authorities. So it's a real pleasure to see you here, Elena, and thank you, Emmanuel, for gathering us all here. So the first question I ask myself is, why another conference on Ukraine? I only wish that we did not need this because of the evolution of the situation on the ground. I see this is not the direction things are heading. So that is why it is important to remind ourselves that the Ukrainians need us, and the needs of Ukraine are not the same in the wintertime as they are in the summertime. And it was clearly said that Vladimir Putin is trying to generate a blackout and try and get the population to live in the dark and suffer the cold. We see that this is a barbaric war that is waged from the beginning, that it is absolutely intolerable. And we want to make sure that the war in Ukraine does not become so commonplace that we talk about it after the weather forecast. So we have to keep it in the first place of our hearts and our minds. Ukraine needs all of us, and we all are familiar with moments in history where we needed one another, when we needed one another. So it's important to be able to assist one another. So for the Great Duchy of Luxembourg, 16% of my budget dedicated to defense goes straight to Ukraine. That's 16% of our budget that has been allocated to them. I think it's important that they can decide what they need. Arms is one thing, but there's also humanitarian aid, and I would like to say that an additional 4 million will be made available to UN agencies, UNHCR, OCHA, Caritas, and the Red Cross, in addition to what we've already earmarked this year. I mean, these are small elements of assistance, but there are so many volunteers, and Olena, you can say so to Volodymyr, and this goes for you as well, Dennis. When I went to Ukraine, you are the ones who are our hope. I mean, we are going behind you. You are the ones who are motivating the Ukrainian people. And I think that most of us around the table thought in the beginning that the war would last only a few days, but Ukrainians are resisting. They're fighting day in, day out for their survival, and with a fantastic resoluteness. So the desire to fight back and not to let yourselves be overcome. I mean, I went to Bucha, I went to Kiev, and I met with many people who lost absolutely everything, who live in structures that had been given to them by neighboring countries, who are in very dire straits and are still carrying on fighting. And I saw a mother or grandmother who'd gone deaf because of bombings, and I mean, this is still a human fatality. And some will say, oh, we have problems at home and all of that, but we are starting to wonder whether we are going to allow our homes to be heated at 19 degrees instead of 21. But Ukrainians have no choice. I mean, I'm from a generation which has never gone through any kind of war, and I think we need to support Ukraine for as long as Ukraine will need it. And you can certainly count on me. I'm not the biggest one around the table, but I do whatever I can. And it's important, in my opinion, to be able to convince our population. I'm afraid that this just becomes a bit of a humdrum run-of-the-mill, the situation in Ukraine. So it's important to keep it at the forefront and to carry on helping you, because what is going on in Ukraine is inhuman, unacceptable. And it's we need to walk the talk, budget-wise, and with humanitarian aid. I mean, 1% of the population in Luxembourg is Ukrainian now. We have Ukrainian refugees, and what is important now is, of course, to save the country, but also not to deprive a future generation from education and a chance of having a future. So, so you can count on us. I'm very happy to be here. We are here with you, and we will remain with you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister and dear Xavier. And now I'm going to give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Mr. Peter Fiala, President and Executive Officer of the President of the European Union.
Mr. President, dear Emmanuel, dear Prime Minister, dear Denis, Mrs. Zelenska, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first let me appreciate the organization of this important conference. Our main task today is to make our help to Ukraine better coordinated and more effective. To make this possible, we need to focus on three key areas: military, economic, and humanitarian support. First, in terms of military support, Ukraine needs our ongoing help to push the aggressor out of its territory. This is the first and crucial condition to stop the war. Second, we need to guarantee the economic stability and financial perspective of Ukraine. So I am glad that the EU has approved the macro-financial assistance to Ukraine. It is essential to provide enough money for daily operation of the country. And finally, the humanitarian help is needed for surviving the winter and avoiding another migration wave. Russia is now trying hard to keep Ukraine in the dark and cold, but we will simply not allow it. Energy equipment is especially important. Czech Republic is currently delivering 2 cogeneration units to Kharkiv region, 10 diesel generators to local hospitals and water companies in Kiev, Dnipro, and Lviv regions, and 500 heaters for personal use. Altogether worth €2 million, so people can keep warm and have some light in times of blackout. As for shelters and medical assistance, we are delivering cold-proof emergency shelters to Western Central Ukraine worth €2.5 million, and mobile intensive care units to the Ministry of Health worth of €1 million. We have also pledged to provide 14 pontoon bridges and other equipment useful for transport, agriculture, and education. The success of similar donor efforts depends on efficient coordination, both among Western actors and with Ukrainian stakeholders. My country makes successful use of national structures, EU-based structures, and private companies. During the Czech EU presidency, we have also been promoting coordination inside the EU to secure urgent humanitarian assistance and accommodate the needs of war refugees. As a result, Europe was capable to bring together donor governments, EU institutions, and various implementing partners. On the other hand, we know from the field that the coordination of help in Ukraine is still running separately for Ukrainian and international responders. That is why Czech Republic is now contributing to the pilot project in Odessa region, aimed at local stakeholders and boosting their coordination capacities. As winter progresses, it is easy to be overwhelmed by urgent needs, but it would be a mistake to lose our focus on long-term stabilization, recovery and reconstruction plans, including the prospect of EU membership for Ukraine. It is important to evaluate the progress Ukraine has made in these extraordinary circumstances to become the EU member. The progress I saw during my last visit in Kiev was impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, by coordinating our response, we will be able to focus it precisely where it is needed the most. We have all been facing challenges, but we cannot afford to slow down. Remember that our world has been shaken, but for Ukraine, a part of their world has been absolutely destroyed. But it is in our power to help build it again together. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Peter, for those words and your commitment. I'm now going to give the floor to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Sorry, sound not working.
On the front lines and those cut off from heat. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the governments of France and Ukraine for hosting this international conference to support Ukraine's civilian resilience. The war in Ukraine is a relentless humanitarian nightmare. It is getting worse as the days pass and the temperature drops. Civilians are paying an especially heavy price during the winter season, particularly people living on the front lines and those cut off from heat, water and essential services. Every major Ukrainian power plant and electricity transmission system has suffered damage due to Russian bombing. Power, water and heating engineers are working around the clock to repair the energy infrastructure. But today, 10 million consumers, including families, businesses, hospitals and schools, are without electricity and millions are cut off from water and heat. The severe destruction to homes, livelihoods and critical infrastructure will take years to rebuild. Over the past few months, humanitarians have provided more than 630,000 civilians with direct winter assistance, and 400 generators have been distributed to critical facilities. Thousands more are being procured or have already been dispatched to Ukraine from abroad. But all of this is a drop in the bucket. The scale of destruction across the country requires strong support from the international community, going far beyond humanitarian aid. We must invest in Ukraine's resilient recovery and reconstruction to prevent the current crisis from cascading into poverty, hunger and destitution for millions of Ukrainians. And we must work together to create the conditions to forge peace in line with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. Thank you for coming together to do just that.